And I don't know how to say this.
It's been a while since I felt this way. The night was long and the sky was gray, and I wondered if I would always feel lonely. The winter chill is nice at first, but after a while the cold just burns, and I'm ready for the sun to shine down on me. Oh, now I feel the sun. Yeah, being with you. One kiss of your lips and you're making my whole world bloom. I'm feeling brand new, oh, in the light of the moon. Oh, we're dancing all night to a favorite Timberlake tune. I can't stop this feeling, I'm falling for you. Thought love was a fleeting friend, just a dandelion lost in the wind. Go on, catch it if you can. For a while thought I was close, but I got thorns and not a rose. But with you I've got a field of wildflowers. I just love being with you, being with you. One kiss of your lips and you're making my whole world bloom. I'm feeling brand new, oh, in the
Yours is, see that bright light there, and then I'm looking.
Over here?
Yeah.
Okay. So when we introduce, look up or just look at you?
You can look at me, or you can talk. Thank you all for coming, and thank all of you who are watching online to our Texas Public Policy Foundation primer. Today we're focusing on Dr. Carol Swain's latest book, The Adversity of Diversity. We're going to do a deep dive into DEI policies and politics over the next hour. It is great to have Dr. Swain back with us here in Austin. She is a good friend to me. She is a good friend to Texas Public Policy Foundation, was one of our comrades in arms during this legislative session as we fought for tenure reform. We fought to remove critical race theory out of Texas higher ed curriculums, and we also fought the big battle for the toughest DEI, anti-DEI legislation in the state. Dr. Swain testified, got into some very heated discussions with some Democrats that we'll talk about that went very well. So she is a leader in this battle across the country to remind us where we've been and to help us give a better path to where we're going. For those of you who don't know Dr. Swain, here's the latest book. She has was a high school dropout and subsequently has received 5 college degrees, including a Ph.D. at the University of North Carolina. She's a tenured faculty member at Princeton, also taught at Vanderbilt. She has written 11 books. This is one of 11 on the issue of race and education and her travels here. This book is interesting to me, and I wanted to ask you about the dedication. She dedicates this book to 5 of her great-grandchildren who are African American, and also some friends of hers whose children are Anglo, pointing out that DEI is a threat to the entire nation and to all of our children. John Ellis has a piece in Wall Street Journal today saying that our universities are a threat to America.
They are.
So, Dr. Swain, thank you for coming.
First, Sherry, don't call me Dr. Swain anymore. My name is, call me Carol.
Okay.
And I'm going to call you Sherry.
Okay.
We know that those degrees, we know that they don't mean what some of the people that are holding those degrees think. And so that common sense is really what we need today at this hour. And universities have definitely lost their way.
Well, yeah, you pointed out to me yesterday that the mean grade at Harvard is an A-.
That's right. And Yale, 80% of the students get A's. And I mean, it's sad that the quality of education has diminished to the point it has. Now, we've always had grade inflation, but professors used to try to protect the integrity of the A's.
Well, how did we get there? There's so many things I want to talk to you about, including the eruptions on campuses today. But one of the things that I really loved about your book was that you took us back to where affirmative action got inserted into our educational system, and I was not as clear on that as you were in your book. So.
Well, what I talk about is that most people don't know that affirmative action was never the law of the land. It was never passed by both houses of Congress and signed by a president, that it was a series of executive orders. You know, the most prominent one, 1960 with John F. Kennedy, and then Lyndon Johnson had an executive order, and Richard Nixon, the Republican, he was the one that brought us quotas through the Philadelphia Plan. And when we think about Kennedy's executive order, back then you did not have the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But Lyndon Johnson was the one that took affirmative action to a whole new level with his famous Howard University commencement address in 1965, where he used an analogy of a shackled runner, that you don't take a shackled runner and take that person to the the head of the line and tell that person you can compete and you've been fair, because the shackled runner, of course, couldn't compete at the same level. So he said we'd go to the next stage, equality of results rather than equality of opportunity. And when the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed, it was passed to prohibit discrimination on the basis of race, color, sex, national origin, religion. And then later, it was amended and it included disability through executive orders and administrative statements. It now includes the LGBTQ community. But that's where we are. But the original intent was to prohibit discrimination. And sure, I can tell you over the years, I've met many white people, and I've taught courses on civil rights, and they always kind of thought that civil rights had nothing to do with them. That was just something for people of color. But the civil rights law that was passed in 1964 was passed to protect all persons.
Well, in '64, now of course, we were just very, very young.
At least I was.
No,
No, I'm not. I didn't mean it that way. It came out wrong. In '64, I was 10 years old.
I'm not even going to respond to that. Things were not good in '64. So why was this a bad solution to look at Johnson's instinct to go with race-based favoritism? Was one of the things you call it.
Well, I mean, initially the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was to address past and present effects of discrimination. So it was set up to address pretty much the situation that African Americans and maybe some Hispanics found themselves in. And it was a culmination of a long civil rights movement. You know, most prominently, we remember the 1950s and some of the things that happened with the Montgomery bus boycott, and at any rate, it was a high point for America. And I can tell you that as a child, the blacks that I knew, the black community, there was a lot of excitement and enthusiasm. And I grew up at a time where there was a lot of hope. And I would argue that I benefited from the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the original intent, because out of that came outreach and advertising of jobs. White people benefited, white men benefited, white women benefited, because for the first time, jobs were not just filled by someone picking up the phone, calling someone they knew, telling them about opportunities. Jobs had to be advertised nationally. And so it was the right thing to do. And then colleges and universities and many employers started their outreach. And that was what diversity used to be about. It was about trying to identify populations that may not have had opportunities, making them aware of these opportunities. I don't think most Americans had a problem with that. I think that was the original intent of the Civil Rights Act, and the quotas that came so quickly. It's almost like, you know, people lied because the quotas came so quickly. That was not initially part of the package. And so you can almost say that almost immediately after the birth of the civil rights legislation, right when it was just beginning, you get quotas in a way that was reverse discrimination against whites. But when white people complained about reverse discrimination, even as late as 1970s, 1980s, I have to tell you that everyone laughed, including other white people. Everyone laughed at the idea, of a white person complaining about reverse discrimination, but not anymore. No one's laughing because it is so real, and it reached levels that I don't think anyone ever anticipated. And my book, The Adversity of Diversity, I anticipated the fall of race-based affirmative action in higher education because I knew that things had gone to the point that if the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause meant anything, if the civil rights laws meant anything, the Supreme Court had to act. They didn't have an alternative. And the case that was decided in June, Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard and University of North Carolina, it was Asian students. They were the plaintiffs, and they were being discriminated against in the same way that Jewish students had been discriminated against. And you know, my heart goes out for the Jews because they have really suffered, but Jewish students were discriminated against because of their success in the same way that Asian students have been discriminated against.
Yes, I remember news reports during that time of you can't, in similar to discrimination against Hispanics, you can't always discern if a person is Jewish by their name. And so they would look at pictures and try to figure out if they could screen out students.
Right, and the blacks, many of the blacks that were part of the civil rights movement, they wanted the pictures removed. And there are some schools in the Northeast and in parts of the country that never discriminate on the basis of race, and I would argue that Harvard University would be one of those because Harvard admitted its first black student in the 1800s. I can't remember the exact year, but let's say 1871 or something like that. And then W.E.B. Du Bois got his Ph.D. from Harvard. There have always been black alumni in those schools that never discriminated, but they were not in large numbers. And black students had the uncomfortable or heartbreaking situation of qualifying, getting admitted to a school, and then when people found out that they were black, then they were not admitted. And so this whole thing about blacks in the civil rights movement, it was not about lowering standards, it was not about preferential treatment. If you look at the black middle class in DC, there is a black middle class because of civil service tests. Blacks love the civil service test because the person who had the highest score got the job. And so you knew that if you wanted to get a government job, you had to study, you had to apply yourself, you had to have the highest score. And so this whole thing of lowering standards and making the arguments about what blacks can't do, in my opinion, it's racism.
It's interesting, you talked about LBJ's goal and the goal of the unshackling to repair past wrongs.
Right.
Well, that's all.
We know enough about Johnson to know that was not Johnson's goal. They realized that they could not keep blacks in the South oppressed, and so he came up with a strategy to build goodwill among black people, I would say.
What about, so then, 20, 30 years later, we elect the first black president, Obama. He beats John McCain by 10 million votes. There are bound to be a couple of white people that voted for him because he really won big. Is he the first president to bring the idea of diversity, the word diversity, into the conversation? I saw that in your book, but I wasn't sure that's what you were saying.
I don't think so, because if you look at Ronald Reagan's presidency, you know that Ronald Reagan, when he was first elected, people thought that he would get rid of affirmative action because it's executive orders. Any president could have issued another executive order overturning affirmative action. And people knew that it was reverse discrimination, but he didn't do that. And so there have been other presidents that have had diversity in their administrations. If we want to say that Obama did anything, it was to bring the critical race theory and the DEI into the decision making in a way that it had not been before. And I can tell you, as someone who left academia, I left in 2017, I noticed the night and day difference after Obama was elected. I can also say that two things. In a book that I don't have here, Be the People, A Call to Reclaim America's Faith and Promise, I have a couple of chapters about Obama. One is Obama and Me. And in 2006, I believe, December, Ebony magazine asked me to write an article, Is America Ready for a Black President? And they also asked Al Sharpton, and so we both have two articles in an Ebony magazine. We both concluded that America was ready for a black president. I said that the first black president would be someone like Barack Obama, based on his 2004 Democratic Convention speech that everyone loved, and or Colin Powell. So those were my two. And Al Sharpton said it would be a civil rights activist, someone that he
like
described
him.
himself. Yeah, right. But we both came out at the same place. And I heard an interview that President Obama gave, and they asked him when he decided to run for office. He said he was on vacation, he read an article.
So there you go.
I don't know what he read, but he said that. And but I can tell you, I did not vote for Obama either time, because I, as a Christian that's gone to many different churches, I know enough about churches to know that there's one for everyone. There are predominantly white churches, there are racially diverse churches, they're Black, Hispanic, Korean, every kind of church you want to have. If I were a person that believed as Obama presented himself in 2004, I would never have been in Reverend Wright's church. And so once I learned about Reverend Wright's church, I knew that we were dealing with a person that was not being honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, how did we're here to do a deep dive into DEI and diversity. How did diversity, the meaning, get completely convoluted?
Well, I mean, part of what I argue in my book is that affirmative action, the critical race theory, and diversity, equity, and inclusion are very much connected. And that even though, affirmative action had good intentions, we have heard the expression, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. What has happened is the diversity that came out of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, when schools and employers started reaching out and advertising jobs, that was doing it the right way. And I would argue that we made a lot of progress, and the emphasis was on equal opportunity. And I would argue, despite my poverty and all the things that we want to talk about, I felt that I had an equal opportunity to succeed or to fail. But it depended on me. Equity says you get the equal result. Equity is not the same as equal opportunity. And back in the 1960s, we, under the law, we became a colorblind society because we also passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Open Housing Act of 1968. I usually don't throw in the Immigration Reform Bill, but if you want to throw it in, you can. But America tried to become a colorblind society, and under the law, we achieved that. And I would argue that the prejudice and discrimination that have persisted, that's individuals acting the way human nature is. But under the law, we wanted integration, and a lot of integration occurred. Inclusion is not the same as integration. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, their diversity is about you bring in people and they're representing their group. And that's more important. They're not individual. They're there to represent their group. They're there to speak for their group. And with integration, you come into, you become part of the whole. Well, with inclusion, they want you to keep your separate identity, and it's almost like you have to have a chip on your shoulder. And I've noticed in academia, and Sherry, I know you've probably seen this too, that the minorities who have gotten the greater rewards have been the ones that were angry, the ones that made white people feel the most comfortable. Those were the ones that got rewarded. And so with inclusion, it was not the same as integration. You come in, you have the chip on your shoulder, and the equity was about results, but not equal opportunity.
It's an interesting thing. When you were testifying in the legislature, and there was a great exchange with you and the state senator from Dallas, Royce West, African American from Dallas, and he clearly, he's probably one of the most articulate Democrats in the state. He clearly felt that you were challenging something that was very important for African American people. He just kept pushing back.
I believe that they believe that, and I believe a lot of white people believe it, and that's why they go along with a program or a set of initiatives that are clearly discriminatory, and I think they're hurting the groups that they purport to help, even the LGBT community, that those communities that DEI is set up supposedly to help, that they're being hurt by the people that are pushing it. And during my era, when I would argue that you had equal opportunity, you could fail. We weren't told that math was racist. And I said in my book, I talk about my own journey. I took remedial math at a community college, and I had to take statistics when I was in graduate school. I had to have the obligatory regression analysis in my dissertation and later my book. You had to meet the standards. I saw lots of people that failed along the way, but I've always felt that if we did it differently, I don't believe everyone belongs in college, but also I started at a community college and graduated from a community college, and based on my record there, I transferred to a 4-year college. I graduated magna cum laude. How? Because I made a decision that I wanted to be an honor student. I wanted to distinguish myself for the applications. So I checked out books, how to make A's in college, how to write essay exams, how to take objective tests, and I just applied the principles. I had a goal. There was no one ever telling me what I couldn't do. And the messages I received as a young person, even from my family, where people were not college educated, was that if you worked hard, if you got an education, you could make something out of yourself. But it was always about what you could do. You could make something out of yourself, that it was not somebody that was going to give it to you. You had to put forth some effort. And I believe that there have been so many racial and ethnic minorities, and probably maybe some poor whites too, that have failed along the way because they were pushed. The mismatch theory that I talk about in my book by the Professor Sanders and his co-author, people that would have been successful had they not gone to the flagship university at their college, or had they not gone to the Ivy League, had they gone to a community college first, tend to get into institutions where they are over their heads, they're drowning, and they used to could flunk out. And I don't think they can flunk out now, but what you have is you end up with people who are very angry. And I'd be angry too if colleges and universities were admitting me to make their numbers look good. I'm drowning, I'm not getting a good education, I can't even do the work. It makes them look good. I'd be very angry because it is using people and it's really destroying their lives. And those people that are getting the A's that don't deserve them at Harvard and the other elite institutions, when they apply for jobs and employers may discriminate in the sense that they're not going to say that see the A as the same, because they know if everyone gets an A, like if everyone has an A, just how do you distinguish? I think when it comes to racial and ethnic minorities, because of affirmative action, they're going to certainly assume that theirs were not earned, and people don't end up where they think they should be. They're not the CEOs that they think they should be. They're not promoted as quickly as they think they should, and so they are upset, and then critical race theory tells them that it's racism, and that's what's to blame. And so we end up with a lot of angry people. We end up with people who could be successful if we used a different method. And in this book, the adversity of diversity, we talk about in the corporate world, where political correctness and some of the things that have taken place has resulted in corporations losing their best talent because someone cracks a joke or someone does something, and then another person is offended, and they sometimes end up firing a CEO that founded the company. And you think about Mozilla and Brandon Eich that gave $1,000 to a family nonprofit that had to do with traditional marriage, and he ended up, having to leave the company he founded. And it's just a waste of talent. And I think that we can do better. And that DEI, what it's become, it's like affirmative action on steroids. Like affirmative action used to be about compliance, and companies had their affirmative action officers, they wanted to be compliant with the law. DEI is not about compliance. When you tell white people that you're not promoting them because they're white, or you tell all white people that they have an illness, that all white people are privileged, that they're damned because of the color of their skin, that their ancestors are all guilty, and you have little children in K through 12 where you tell them that their ancestors are guilty for all the evils of the world, that's DEI today. That is clearly a violation of the Equal Protection Clause. It's clearly a violation of our Civil Rights Acts, and it's something that I argue in the book that the DEI programs that you have in corporate America and in other institutions, that they violate the law, they violate the Constitution in the same way as the cases that came before Harvard. I expect those programs to fall, but I don't expect diversity to end, because the true diversity is not based on what those programs have been doing. Those programs have been very destructive of race relations, as well as it hasn't benefited the groups that it was supposed to benefit.
It's interesting, if you remember, was it last summer, Bernie Sanders was pressed, somebody pressed him on equity. And he said, I'm for equality. And well, that's not the question. You're for equity. He could not define it. And Senator West actually was pressed the same way. I'm for equality.
You know, the whole DEI industry, like so much of it is so ludicrous because you can be whatever you identify as. So I can identify as a white male from, you know, well, whatever I want to identify as, I could identify as, and they don't have anything that they can really say when Elizabeth Warren or that Rachel, I can't remember her last name, but the various people that they have caught, and they catch more and more all the time, white people that have identified as racial and ethnic minorities to get the benefit. And I know from previous research that ethnic fraud has been a problem in higher education ever since we've had affirmative action. There is no one going home with people making sure that they didn't check the, you know, they're not checking and going home to see whether you have a Native American ancestor or you are biracial. It's pretty much the honor system. And people that don't believe in it, who believe it's discriminatory, that want to get ahead and they want to take advantage of it, there's no real penalty for checking the box. And so we've set up a situation where it could be, and I've thought this for a long time, Sherry, an act of civil disobedience to check the box because you feel it's discriminatory. And, you know, like one reason why I think I feel so passionate about all of this.
Check the box that you're white?
Yeah, if you don't believe that, you think that it's an unjust law, it's unfair, it's discriminatory, I want to get ahead, I was born in Appalachia, my parents live in a shack, I don't want to live there anymore, why not check the box? And I've often thought that if I were that poor white male from Appalachia, might be tempted to check that box.
Well, I am an Oklahoman, and I totally understood, just indulge me for a story, I totally understood Elizabeth Warren. But the thing was, she told the lie that if you didn't want to be an Indian in Oklahoma. Well, in Oklahoma, every year you come to school, they put the forms down, are you a Native American? If so, what tribe? They had representatives from every tribe is represented in Oklahoma. So the idea that she had to hide this, and then it just suddenly, when she was going to be a faculty member at Harvard, it comes out because she was too ashamed of it before.
It didn't come out then. It came out when she ran for, I mean, she benefited at Harvard. That's how she got her, could be how she got her tenure. It came out much later in her career. She benefited from it. And there are other people that, I've heard of other faculty people, and sometimes your family, like maybe you pay them off and you pay them off and you pay them off, and then at some point you get tired of paying off your family, and then they go to the media and they say that you're not what you've been claiming to be. That was a case recently of someone that had been doing that for years. And, but that's what we have created, and there's a better way. And, you know, in my book, I talk about Unity Training Solutions. It's a company that I conceived as an alternative. I can tell you that people are not pounding the door for Unity Training because people are sick of it. They are sick of anything that has to do with diversity training. And you find that companies are backing away from DEI because they know it doesn't work. It disrupts the workforce. And the Biden administration and the people that are fighting for it, I mean, they are fighting for it, but I mean, at the end of the day, corporations and people know that it doesn't work. It's destroying our U.S. military. The Navy, I just read that they are hiring someone to teach sexual, you know, some of those gender studies for the academies, for the naval academies. Yeah, I mean, it's just absurd that they have lost their way, and it's up to us to turn things around.
Well, I know you've gotten this question recently in talking with the university. Did you feel like that you belonged when you went to college? Because there's a new guy that's been hired at the University of Texas, and we can't have DEI anymore, and this guy will be the director of Access, Belonging, and Civic Education.
Yeah, in fact, I spoke at a university last week, or maybe it was, yeah, I think it was last week, and someone said, do you know that there's a B on to DEI. And yes, I do. It's DEIB. B is for belonging. It's not enough to bring people in, but you have to make sure that they feel like they belong. And so the question was, did I feel like I belonged at Princeton? And I said no. And the reason I didn't feel like I belonged is that I didn't just have to try to figure out how to learn how to teach, but I had to figure out which piece of silverware to pick up and, you know, which water glass was mine. And I would have benefited from a good, from a finishing school or a good course on etiquette. And I don't think most people feel like they belong when they're young. I think being young, being a teenager, being in your 20s, it's an awkward period of time. So how can you deal with someone's emotions and make them feel like they belong? And in the world of DEI, a lot of people are in positions where they don't belong. How can you deal with that psychology? They don't belong sometimes in the roles they're in.
And that's part of the challenge. That's one of the things that you do.
There's no way to win it.
I wanted to talk about two of these old guys. We have so many young people here at TPPF. Al Sharpton.
What about him?
And Jesse Jackson, the two of the greatest civil rights leaders of our times. I've passed them in my life.
They have been great entrepreneurs because they figured out a way to take what would have been an unpaid, selfless civil rights activist position and become multimillionaires to pass things down to their families. And so I don't think the younger generation of activists, BLM, and all of those people actually would give those leaders the time of day. They have their own way of, it's all about a shakedown. And I'm afraid you white people allow yourselves to be shook down a lot. Yeah. Because people just seemingly have lost their voice. And like things that you know, like it shouldn't be hard to stand up for the Constitution. It shouldn't be hard to stand up for our civil rights laws. It shouldn't be hard to stand up for science. But so many people are afraid, and they're afraid of being called racist. And I have news for you. You're going to be called racist if you're white, regardless of what you do. And so why not just do the right thing? And there's someone here, you from Moms for Liberty. I applaud the moms groups, and it's not just Moms for Liberty, it's Moms for America, and there are probably other mom groups. I've heard of mom groups, moms. Well, it was the mothers that stood up because their children were coming home crying and asking these questions because they had been told things about their ancestors. Their children were being bullied and shamed, and so the moms stood up, and a lot of them have been really, it's been a huge sacrifice for them and their families because they've been demonized for standing up for their children, but it was the right thing to do. And I can tell you how I feel as a black person. I feel that it is important for me to speak up for the civil rights and civil liberties of all Americans, and I don't want to be, I don't want my great-grandchildren or my grandchildren or anyone's grandchildren to be bullied or shamed because of the color of their skin. And I think that every black person has an obligation to stand up and speak. It's not okay what's taking place. And the kind of affirmative action that's being offered today is crippling for minority students. It's not helping them. And I believe that if I had come through during a time when I was told that I could blame other people for my situation, that I would not have been successful. I think that it mattered that I had mentors and people in my life that encouraged me and that didn't cripple me. I think we're crippling young people today, and I think we're crippling young white people today too, because so many of them have been taught to hate themselves, to hate their parents, their grandparents, even the privilege of having two parents that love you. They hate that. And so, that's not normal.
Yeah. Talk about, one of the things you talked about in your book that really impressed me was the martyrdom of George Floyd.
Okay, and then how are we doing time-wise?
We've got 10 minutes.
Okay, well, we might want to talk a little bit about what's happening with Hamas and that type of thing. But, okay, long before Tucker came out, or a few months before Tucker came out with the autopsy and the discussion about George Floyd's death, I said in this book that the first autopsy said that George Floyd had COVID and he died of cardiac arrest, and he had fentanyl and other things in his system, and that he was dying in that police car. That's how he got out of the car. But and then the family got 2 other autopsies, and one said that he was in good health. What the left did was use George Floyd's death to push through aggressive DEI programs that would never have been accepted by the American public. They used George Floyd, and so it was one of those crises that they didn't let go to waste. And so now the corporations, they gave millions of dollars to Black Lives Matter, and now we know that that money was not used well. It didn't go to the Black Lives Matter chapters in various cities. It enriched the people, like Ibram Kendi. Those people have been able to enrich themselves, but it hasn't benefited Black America as a whole. Some white people that are honest have been able to see this, and so they have moved away from some of the aggressive DEI programs. But these are the books that I have today. And recently I gave a talk that talked about all of my books, and there has always been a theme that's been consistent. And when I wrote The Adversity of Diversity, I quoted from a 1983 senior paper that I wrote on affirmative action, and my views on affirmative action have not changed. I was a Democrat then. I was much closer to my poverty, and I saw problems with that program back in 1983. I made an A+ on that paper, by the way. And but this book, Black Eye for America: How Critical Race Theory is Burning Down the House, this was published in 2021, and I wrote it because there were so many parents and teachers, and they were wondering, what had happened, because the theories that were on college campuses, they had already begun to be distilled into the teachers' education programs, but it got into public schools at a level that no one anticipated. They didn't know what it was. And so this book was written to equip parents, and it has 2 chapters on how to fight back. And we're still fighting that battle, because even if you pass legislation banning it, they continue doing it. And so you have to be ever vigilant. And then the adversity of diversity, I just think that there's a better way, and that people need to know that what has happened is a violation. You have civil rights laws, you have protections from the Constitution, and you need to fight back. In Texas, I'm so proud of Texas and TPPF for leading the way, and Governor DeSantis of Florida, they passed a law that was prohibiting DEI. And what has happened at many colleges and universities, they have vowed to fight back, that they're just changing the names of their programs, they're continuing to do the same things, but we can hold them accountable. And, oh, I didn't see that before. We can hold them accountable. And this book, Countercultural Living, what Jesus has to say about life, marriage, race, gender, and materialism, a pastor commissioned me to write this book, and I'm the only non-theologian, and it was one of the hardest books I've written in my life, and he told me he gave me that assignment because he knew that it would be hard.
Well, in our 5 minutes, and we'll take some questions too. I know we're getting questions online already, but talk about what's going on campus today. We know that in the last 3 or 4 years, the number of DEI officers on campus has quadrupled. And now we're seeing right out here, up in the streets, marches in support of Palestinians and Hamas.
Right, and from the University of Michigan leads the way. Last time I checked, they had 173 DEI personnel, and Virginia Tech and University of Virginia, I think they were 2nd and 3rd. So, and that's one reason why college tuitions are so high, is that they're supporting that huge infrastructure. And when you think about DEI, these pro-Palestinian groups and the protests that are taking place on campus, that's part of the DEI regime. And because the people that are leading those protests tend to be ethnic minorities or people that are not seen as Caucasian, they're not being held to the same standards, because if it were blacks or Hispanics or some other racial ethnic minorities being harassed and threatened the way Jews are being harassed and threatened, it would be shut down. It would have been shut down immediately. But because it's racial and ethnic minorities, you find professors saying things that if you were conservative or if you were white and you were to say the exact same thing, they would get rid of you overnight. They would send you away. But because it's a racial and ethnic minority, there is a double standard. And I don't believe that we can truly be free as a nation until we hold everyone to the same standard. And you say, well, the First Amendment, they're exercising their First Amendment rights. You don't have a First Amendment right to threaten someone or to harass someone the way the Jews are being harassed. And this is America. This is America. All of us need to be standing up and fighting back against this, holding our members of Congress accountable. And it's not a Democrat or Republican thing. I think that when we talk with our neighbors, when we talk with people, this is an American thing. Who are we as a people? What do we believe? We all have to stand up.
How did Jews get caught in the DEI trap? I mean, they also have a history of slavery.
Well, I can tell you about the Jews. I can't tell you about the Jews, but I can tell you about the Jews. As a university professor, I was astonished by how many Jewish students that were anti-Israel and pro-Palestinian. Over the years, they had been indoctrinated, with a hate against Israel. And I've been around long enough now that some of these students that I taught are in their 30s, and I'm telling you, they've realized that they're Jewish and that there's something different about being Jewish. And like, I'm normally against identity politics, but in the case of these Jewish students that were anti-Israel, I think it's good that they realize that they're Jewish. And if there's anything positive to come out of it, is that they are realizing that the progressives are not their friends.
Well, we've just got a minute or so. When we were arguing for the DEI laws, one of the things that we argued was that it wasn't working. We don't have, A&M has fewer African-American students after 10 years of DEI, and we show nothing that shows that there's any improvement. And as you say, now they're coming back and not really, even though we passed the law, they're not really stopping. They're just reconfiguring and renaming the offices. It struck me the other week when A&M, I know we have some Aggies in here, when Jimbo Fisher didn't win those football games, they just fired him. They fired him in the middle of the season.
They understand merit.
It wasn't hard, and yet we still got our major universities, our flagships, including A&M, insisting that we should try another decade. They've been at A&M since 2010.
That's what they're doing. What they're doing is, they like to publish the numbers of their diversity. All of those DEI people that they have hired, and those people are taking the place. They're not in academic departments. And they have to have a job, and their job is to keep conflict alive. That's their job. They're counting them. And so they can look good on paper and have fewer students, but have people on their payroll that belong to certain groups. And so they have a gig, and I think the gig should be up.
Questions? Yes, sir.
Hi. Okay. Hi, my name's Mark. I'm half Jewish, like Barry Goldwater. And my question, I've noticed recently, I'm seeing online some of these defense contractors are kind of jumping in on the, well, not the DEI, the other one, the ESG game. And I'm assuming, like Rush Limbaugh used to say, follow the money. And I'm assuming they're getting big fat federal contracts to push this nonsense. And it's like, how is a defense contractor, even assuming that diversity is an important thing, that they're qualified to be involved in this?
Well, you don't have to be qualified. You just have to just have an opinion or whatever the elites are pushing. And ESG, I talk about some of that in the book, as well as the Corporate Equality Index. And there's a lot of money and pressure coming globally on corporations as well as agencies to show how diverse they are. And the thing about the Biden administration, they may tout themselves as being the most diverse in American history. And what they have done is they have separated qualifications from diversity. And so that's why so many of their appointees will talk about their group identity as opposed to their qualifications. And I would say that with Reagan and Nixon and in previous years, when they appointed racial and ethnic minorities, they appointed people that were qualified. They had to meet certain standards. Well, today it doesn't seem like that. All you have to do is be a member of the right group. And to me, it's so demeaning to racial and ethnic minorities what they have done. It's so demeaning that we have a situation, we have a president that if his vice president wasn't incompetent, we would have all been in favor of the 25th Amendment being invoked. But even with the president that is clearly struggling, people would rather have him than have the vice president because they know that this person is not qualified. I mean, that sets us back. And you asked about President Obama. What I saw was the culture. They say cultural Marxism doesn't exist. Neo-Marxism came through that administration, and it has infected every institution in our society. And we're so far gone. I would like to see things reversed, but I'm not optimistic.
Yeah, quite a contrast with Reagan's appointment of Sandra Day O'Connor. And the old tape just showed she's the best person for a job. That's what he said. Other questions? Yes, sir.
So the question that I have is ultimately going to be going towards the idea of DEI in professional organizations. If you want to carry a license to be a doctor or a lawyer, and I myself am a lawyer, my wife's a speech therapist, and we're seeing it in speech therapy. They require now that you take at least 2 hours of DEI, continuing education a year, where you're made to do the continuing education. And lawyers were seeing it more and more coming from the State Bar of Texas, in the incoming administrations of the presidents, how we need more DEI. They haven't forced it into the continuing education yet. However, they have gone after the law licenses of those that have in any way been perceived to be opposed to DEI. I would argue Sidney Powell, the famous former federal prosecutor who's defended Donald Trump, and they've gone after her law license. My question ultimately is, based on your study of the history of DEI, where do you see this going, and what do you think can be done about it?
Well, first of all, what you're talking about is potentially deadly and dangerous, and especially in medical schools, because we have doctors that have said that if two people present themselves in an emergency room, maybe they're both having heart attacks, or maybe they're not, maybe they're complaining of chest pains, that they're going to wait on the minority first, because that person may have been discriminated against or their ancestors. And so they're bringing DEI into the medical profession. And then when you have certain airlines saying that they're going to become more aggressive, like I see black pilots, female pilots. I mean, there is diversity among pilots and people that work for the airlines. But if they decide that they have to have a certain quota and they're going to lower the standards, they put all of us at risk. And my only hope is that we would have people elected, and it doesn't mean Republicans are all over the place. Just because they're Republican doesn't mean that they're going to respect the Constitution or our civil rights laws, but there has to be some balance. We have to go back to the law of the land, and what is happening now, again, it's like affirmative action on steroids. It doesn't even give lip service to our civil rights laws and our Constitution, and it's a very dangerous situation, and we need men and women with courage to stand up, and we need the white people with courage to stand up. because it impacts you, it impacts me, it impacts your children. It's destroying our country. And when standards are lowered in K through 12 and in the elite Christian academies and all of these places, it's affecting all of us. It's not affecting just one group.
Hi, my name is Perla Hopkins, and I am a public school mom. I'm also a certified teacher, and I have kids in public universities here in Texas. Your work is so profound because, yes, indeed, it is so destructive, especially to multi-ethnic children like mine, where at the local school district, Leander, they've set up programs such as Access, where they took just 2 out of the 6 high schools in the district and only provided counseling and college tours to the Black students in those 2 out of 6 high schools, leaving children like mine out, which is a clear violation of educational law, because each student in the state of Texas, high schooler, is deserving of 20 minutes with their counselor, especially when it comes to collegiate planning. And as you all know, Senate Bill 17 was an all-day affair, debated on the House floor, literally all day. I kept collaborating with some of the offices because I had to leave the Capitol. And so we were finally successful in exposing how destructive DEI and CRT ideologies are. But not sooner than that bill passed, we had, again, school districts like I used to work for and my children attend, set out a second DEI officer position. So we've had a DEI chief of DEI for over 2 years, and he's the 7th highest paid administrator at $163,000.
Some of them are making almost $500,000.
I believe so. And so now the second executive officer of DEI started salary at $124,000.
Okay, so what's your question?
And so my question is, what are we going to do about having tackled this at the public university level, but now it's in K through 12?
And you all may be aware that advanced placement courses, and then there was a scandal in Northern Virginia where the students that were National Merit Scholars were not given the information, and it had to do with they didn't want the kids that didn't qualify to feel badly, and just all of these crazy things. I think it's important for people to document and to file lawsuits, and you may not win them all, and there are some public interest law firms that will take your cases. And I've been the expert witness in 2 or 3 cases, and I've been so waiting for the other side to depose me, and they won't. These cases tend to get settled. But people are winning cases, and I think that white people need to learn how to document discrimination, and your children need to know how to document who was there, what was said, when was it said, but you have to know your rights first. And I believe it's important for everyone to know the civil rights laws of our land. You need to know the law, and you need to know it applies to you, and you need to know that the Constitution applies to every person. And the way we fight back is that we fight back by pressing for our rights. And I think as a racial and ethnic minority, your voice is so important, but everyone's voice is important. And moms and parents and grandparents, just continue to stand up for your children.
Are there more questions in the room? Yes, sir.
You mentioned Ivy League and state flagship institutions. What are the environments like on Christian college campuses across the country?
They have lost their way, and especially Christian colleges and universities. And I happen to be a Southern Baptist, and in 2019 that they adopted a resolution that CRT and intersectionality could be used as analytical tools to understand race. This was the Southern Baptist Convention. And what we have found is that a lot of pastors, for one thing, they're so afraid of being called a Christian nationalist. So the left came up with the concept of Christian nationalists, And that has caused a lot of Christians to back away from anything like patriotism. And at Christian colleges, universities, everyone just want to be loved. And we know that Jesus only talked about love, right? He didn't have anything harsh to say. And so what we find is that the Christian colleges and universities are not standing up. And I would argue, as someone, that's read the Bible several times, is that the gospel of Jesus Christ has everything we need when it comes to race relations, and that it's not, to me, it's unacceptable for racial and ethnic minorities, for black people to continually, if you're in the church, you're a Christian, bring up slavery, because there's a role for forgiveness. And the Southern Baptist Convention, like, I lost count of how many times they've apologized for slavery. And if I were God, I'd be pretty upset, because this constant apology suggests that they don't believe that they can be forgiven. And so they've confessed, they've apologized, but they continually apologize, and they're easily manipulated because of it. And so many parents may think that Christian colleges and universities are safe places. No, critical race theory is there, DEI is there, sometimes they have offices there. And so you really have to be careful about where you send your children. And I'm a big proponent of homeschooling, but also believe that all of us have to be involved in public schools. We just can't turn the public schools over to the people that, that will just indoctrinate all of our children. And I have the unfortunate situation that my great-grandchildren, well, I have one that's in a public school, the others will probably go to public schools, and I know what awaits them there. And I just believe that we have to be involved because we pay our taxes, whether or not our children are in public schools. And we have to be watching our Christian schools like hawks, and our Republican leaders. And just because someone has an R by their name, they may not make as much sense as Senator Fetterman is making right now.
We've just got a couple of minutes. It's been so wonderful having you here, but I want to give you an opportunity. What's next? We've been watching this a long, long time. You've been in this fight a long time. Lots of us have been in this fight a long time.
Well, for myself, I may have an opportunity to return to a university teaching for a visiting position that I'm excited about, and I can't say more about it right now, but I really believe that it's time to get back into the, into the battle in a way, but I miss those relationships where you are with young people on a regular basis. And there's so many great young people that are out there. They were raised in good homes. They have values. They have principles. They're outnumbered. They're intimidated. They need support on college and university campuses. And so, I mean, that is something that excites me a lot. And I have some book projects that I'm working on. But I believe, that God has called me to be out there doing the things that I'm doing, and I feel like I'm living my best life yet. And I thank you all for, the opportunities that I've gotten through TPPF, as well as just being so supportive. All of you who pray for me, and but surely I do need your prayers. But I haven't given up on America. I don't believe God's given up on America, but we all have a role to play. And you just need to figure out what your role is. And Sherry, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. It has just been an honor to have you here with us today. Dr. Swain's books are on sale in the lobby, so make sure you get your Christmas shopping done here before you take off. Thank you again for joining us. One other thing.
Is that I have a nonprofit called Be the People Project, and February 9th and 10th, we're having a conference. It's every year I try to have an American Dream conference, but the theme for next year is we have a country to save, and Larry Elder is the keynote, and then it's a 2-day conference. Second day, we have panels on education, crime, and protecting women's rights. And so Roddy Gaines will be speaking on the second day, and we have someone from Heritage speaking about the rogue prosecutors. Scully. What is Scully's last name? Well, we have someone speaking about that, and also the Women's Bill of Rights. There is a Women's Bill of Rights that they're trying to pass to protect women's sports and other areas. So, I mean, that's a part of what I do too. I think it's important to educate people about conservative values and principles, and I'm involved at times with Blexit. Blexit joined forces with Turning Point USA, and so no matter how bad you think it is, there are some young people out there that are on fire. They have strong values and principles, and they are engaged in the battle, and so everyone should be encouraged by that. And thank you.
The fight goes on. Get involved, find Dr. Swain's activities on our website, go get the books, and thanks again for coming today.